Since this particular time attack prepped EG Civic is probably the most intriguing out of the three cars to arrive in GT7 1.38, I've decided to kick off first with talking about this one. Of course, a ton of people were disappointed that we don't have the standard stock EG Civic. That one is technically included in the data mining leaks, which I talked about, of course, ages ago in that big 80 car leaked list here on the channel, so there is a chance of it coming, but obviously with the longer the time that goes past, and it seems, strangely enough, the fewer of those cars that actually seem to be arriving. We had a good amount of them for a while, I believe around 20 or more, but now it's kind of slowed down. We've been getting cars that weren't in the list, which is still good, you know, new cars are never a bad thing. The chances seem slimmer and slimmer as the age of the game progresses more and more, so I wouldn't be surprised if some of those do get kicked over to the next game. For now though, we do have this, and for EG fans, surely it's got to be better than nothing, and of course for me, it's vindicating, and for anyone else who talked about the car back in the GT Sport days years ago, because we saw this thing, and we finally got it in Gran Turismo. So, what is it like? I touched on it briefly, of course, yesterday in my overall thoughts for the update and unpacking it and getting the first impressions. The spec sheet immediately is mixed in terms of being pretty crazy in some ways and certainly not as crazy in others, but it is strong. It's definitely strong without any tuning applied. It's about the same kind of price that you would expect more so from a supercar or a Group 4 car at 300,000 credits. The point level is still well under 600 though, 589. It has just under 390 horsepower. So not too crazy, not that much more than some hot hatches have anyway these days, but retains of course the front engine front wheel drive chassis. We'll come back to that in a second, of course, and the weight is unsurprisingly very good. The Civic EG is not heavy anyway, so if you strip it out and even with the engine swap turn it into a track day monster, of course it's going to be light. It weighs barely over a ton, 1,014 kilos, so the power to weight ratio is very, very good, up around 390 per ton, and with a turbo, be it mid-range or high-range, you can bump the power way up, way higher than that. So the question is, what is it like in practice? Especially for those who either haven't driven it in the game yet, or maybe just haven't bothered to boot up this update and download it, and you're just curious what the car is like. Well, again, it's a mixed bag. I've seen mostly positive things. Mostly people are enjoying the car, myself included. I personally quite like the interior view with the completely stripped out look. I know it would involve a lot, graphically speaking, but it would be cool to see more racing games implement weight loss in cars in a more tangible way. You know, you do like stage 5 weight reduction and the interior doesn't look any different. Whereas if you could make a car go from looking standard to looking like this, that would be a really cool feature for games to have. Like I said, I know that's a lot of work for the graphics department for the sake of just doing an upgrade, but still, that is the kind of thing that adds authenticity to a game. In terms of handling, well, it's a 400 horsepower, 1,000 kilo front wheel drive hatch, so it's going to have some understeer. It's good through corners, but it's kind of a 50-50 thing. It's really good unless you accelerate. And then exactly what happens is exactly what you'd think would happen. We of course don't have the second generation Ford Focus RS in the game, but that is a perfect real world example. Incidentally, a real world example which I have reviewed here on the channel in Beards and Cars, a shameless plug if you like real world car reviews, even on a production scale. Ford couldn't stop that thing from still having legendary rampant wheel spin off the line, huge torque steer and huge understeer, and that had 300 horsepower. It was in a bigger car, it was built by Ford from the factory, you know, had way more money behind it than this thing did, and it also weighs a lot more, which sometimes could be a benefit to ground the wheels. Even then, it's a notorious car for having torque steer, etc., so of course something like this is always going to have that tendency. If you do put your foot down too early, and certainly if you put your foot down to the floor, you're going to feel it. You know, just don't even try. This is, as I again alluded to in my thoughts for 1.3 overall, it's a missile. You need to point exactly where you want the car to go. Don't slam on the throttle, because you will immediately spin up at least one of the fronts, if not both. Roll on, and then floor it. Top speed wise, I've seen some people disappointed. I mean, for this one I had relatively short gearing on it at the Nordschleife, so it was only doing up around 180 miles an hour. It could definitely do more, but even then, you're probably only looking at, what, 190, 200-ish on most tracks anyway. I don't feel like most people would expect a car like this to do that much more, so I'm not too concerned about that. Off the line, you're going to struggle. You know, even with racing tyres, you're still going to struggle because of the rampant wheel spin. Again, that's the problem with having low weight as well. You've just got nothing grounding those wheels. And in particular, if you reduce the aero package, that doesn't help, technically, which is what I've done here. I do love the aero options, though. It's surprising to me, actually, just how in-depth you can go, because usually the aero in this game works very much in one direction, which is adding more of it to vehicles, adding more wings, more body kits, more chin splitters and diffusers, whereas this way around you're actually reducing it. You're taking stuff off of the car and adding badges, for example, kind of toning it down in a weird kind of way. It certainly doesn't make it look like a standard EG Civic, not even close, but it does have more of a street, almost like Need for Speed kind of look to it, which I personally quite like, as you can see me showcasing on mine. Despite being in that very niche aftermarket tuner, specialised, custom SEMA show car kind of category, some of which manage to push through and be really popular, but many of which really don't. This one, I think, could have that potential. You can put dirt tyres on it and take it off-road. If you leave the aero on it, it certainly has a Pikes Peak even appearance to it. To me, this is a car that I have a lot of respect for because it essentially stays true to everything about the original Civic and just exaggerates everything up to an 11. It's not as crazy, funnily enough, as some of the other show cars in that sense. For those who are EG fans, I'm certainly happy for them that they've got this in the game. I'm happy on a more personal level because we finally got this thing in the game after talking about it years ago, and it's an interesting one to add. Certainly a bit more unique than many of the other aftermarket cars. I would not say it's an essential purchase by any means, and I am very curious to see, since the car technically already has an engine swap, would be pretty cool to see if we could get some other engine swaps in future. Ultimately though, that's it for my thoughts. Drop yours down below, positive, negative, or just somewhere in between, and of course stick around tomorrow and the next day for featuring the other two cars as well. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.